So, if Act 2 was a bunch of exposition and setup and character work, Act 3 is a bunch of very dramatic events and reveals and climaxes that I didn't. A lot of the stuff that happens in this section kind of feels like stuff that should happen towards the end of the book, even though I'm only halfway through the book, which I like. I like the fact that the book is sort of allowing itself to have these dramatic climax moments early on in the story. That being said, let's talk about... I don't have a ton to talk about in this section, however, because a lot of it is just, holy crap, that just happened, which isn't really something I want to spend too much time on. So I'm going to just acknowledge that Harrow's assassination attempt... Oh, wait, spoilers, obviously. Harrow's assassination attempt against Ortis, quote-unquote, is one of the most absurd, over-the-top, like, rule of cool moments in this series so far. And I'm very much including the planet murder in the previous act on that list. Because holy crap, feeding someone soup made of your own bone marrow, and then animating that bone marrow into a skeleton inside that person, and having that skeleton burst through their body in order to try to kill them, might be the most metal thing I've ever seen. There's a lot of depth and analysis to be done of this series, but on some level, there is also a lot that just makes me sort of like giddy and excited like a little kid because of how cool it is. So this was definitely up there in terms of both like horrible goriness and violence, and in terms of just pure conceptual coolness. The rest of the stuff that happens here, however, is not quite as sort of I guess physically extreme would be the right phrase. So the first thing we have here that's happening is, of course, the continued through line of Cytherea's corpse doing stuff. So at the start of this section, we see Ortis, I think, making out with the corpse. At first I thought that he was actually like fully having sex with the corpse, but apparently not. Apparently he was just kissing it. I think. It's left a bit vague, but I think he was just kissing it. That's a disturbing image, but made slightly less disturbing by the fact that it sure seems like she's not fully dead, because she appears to be moving around and doing stuff. Including at the end here, murdering Ortis, or at least trying to. That's another thing, actually. At the end of this section, we get what seems like a death scene from Ortis, where he dies in Harrow's arms. But then in the next scene, he's just around again, so I guess maybe John saved him successfully? Maybe? But he doesn't remember what happened? I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to wait until the part of Act 4 to see if Ortis is really still alive, or if that was like a hallucination on Harrow's part, because she has those, we all know that. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. As for Cytherea's corpse, I still think there is a significant likelihood that Cytherea is actually being animated by Harrow herself subconsciously. I don't know who else it would be. I do believe Mercy when she says it's not her. And I don't think it's Augustine. And I don't think it's John. I think the candidates for who's animating Cytherea are Harrow, Ianthe, or some third party we aren't familiar with. I can't really speculate much further on that because we don't have the information yet. However, there are other plot lines here to talk about. First of all, the relationships between the elder lictors and John. So when Augustine and Mercy Morn plot to distract John in this section, nothing in the world could have prepared me for the fact that the distraction is to have a threesome with him. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, because it's I think a bit of an established trope when you have like a small tightly knit group of immortals who have been alive for thousands of years and who have not had meaningful relationships with people outside of their group because other people are so transient compared to their immortality. You're going to have like complicated romantic and sexual dynamics between them. This is something that's been explored by all sorts of authors. The one I'm thinking of most here is probably N.K. Jemisin in her Inheritance trilogy. But also something that's been explored by plenty of authors who've sort of taken inspiration from Greek mythology, because the Greek gods also had like, well, they were constantly banging each other, often completely regardless of what their current relationships were or what their familial relationships were. And in fact, there's a reference to Greek mythology here. When Augustine like suggests to Mercy that they should seduce John, he uses a phrase, I can't remember it now, but it's a Greek phrase, I believe, that that basically translates to the deception of God or something, which I believe was originally from, I want to say, the Iliad, where Zeus is distracted from participating in the battle by having Hera seduce him, or something like that. I want to say that's where that phrase is from. I've definitely heard it before. I'm scared to Google it because it might spoil something about this book for all I know. But I think that's what that phrase is. Like, I think it refers to the deception of Zeus by means of being seduced. And this didn't help me foresee that the seduction would happen, because I only remembered this phrase, or rather remembered the meaning of this phrase after the fact, when the actual seduction happened. So who knows? Who knows whether there's more to that parallel? Because there was also this weird thing where he emphasized that it's a minor version of that. Augustine emphasized. He said it's a Dios whatever minor. And I'm pretty sure they just had a full-on threesome. So, like, what's a major? What is the major equivalent? Maybe they didn't have sex. Maybe this was just a makeout session. I don't know. Maybe major just means actual penetration. Who knows? But either way, I do think it makes sense, like I said, that these are characters who would have like this kind of sexual tension between them. Um, it is also a deeply uncomfortable scene because you know that Augustine and Mercy Morn are at least partially faking it. They are not being genuine here. Um, they are not necessarily being forthright in their motives with John, which means that this is like a dubiously consensual encounter. Definitely something that makes me a bit uncomfortable, especially considering the amount of alcohol involved. But then again, they are like the immortal god kings of this world, so I guess human morality doesn't quite apply the same way. Again, see the Greek mythology example. Um, that's actually something I really like about Greek mythology, is that the gods often have like they just have different morality applied to them than humans, which I think is something that I always enjoy that when fantasy authors sort of apply that to immortal godlike beings in their worlds. Again, see N.K. Jemison's Inheritance trilogy. Um, Now, there is before I move on to the other thing I want to talk about, there's two other things I want to mention about this particular scene, the seduction of John. One, we get some interesting references to some sort of conflict that happened in the past between Augustine's and Mercy Morn's cavaliers, between Alfred and Christabel. It's not clear if it was a conflict between Alfred and Christabel, or if Christabel sort of corrupted Alfred in Augustine's estimation. I don't know. Something went down between those two that seems to be at least part of the root of the conflict between Augustine and Mercy Morn nowadays. And I don't know what to make of that. I'm there's definitely like a lot of the stuff that's going on between these immortal characters obviously has roots back in their original mortal lifetimes that we know nothing about, so it's hard to really guess. The other thing I want to mention here is just one of my favorite lines in this entire book, which is when during the drunken dinner at one point, John makes like a yo mama joke about Augustine's mom. And the narration, which again is second person view of Harrow. The narration of Harrow seeing her god make a yo mama joke is part of your brain temporarily calcified into atheism. Which is such a good line. I just I don't think I said it in the second video as much as I talked about it in the first, but the prose and the writing style of this book is so unique and so good. I am just constantly in awe of what Tamsin Muir is able to accomplish. Anyway, moving on. The other another big thing that happened in this section is Harrow creating Ianthe's new arm. Now, I knew this was coming because I'd seen plenty of fan art of Ianthe with a golden skeleton arm. So I knew that she would eventually get one. And as soon as this book started and we got that scene where Harrow offers to create a new arm for her, but tells her that she's not very good with flesh, as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, I see what's going to happen. I see how she's going to get her arm. So it wasn't a surprise to me when Harrow gave her the skeleton arm. But the context was surprising. Harrow waking up to find Ianthe weeping on the floor, trying to chop off her own arm, and then sort of silently approaching her and helping her was it's one of those scenes that this book does where what is actually happening is horrific and traumatizing and gory and gruesome, but the way it is described and the way that the characters emotionally experience it makes it feel like you're reading about this beautiful, wholesome, almost romantic moment between these two characters, when what's actually happening is that one of them is cutting off another's arm and then making their own bones like craft a new arm. It's like I said, like if this were a visual medium, it would be very difficult to portray this scene as anything but gruesome. But because of the way that it's written, it comes off as sweet and romantic. And I think that's something that this series, at least so far, really likes to play with. Sort of, it plays with the, I guess, the Eros Thanatos tension, like the tension between violence and eroticism, the tension between the intimacy of a kiss or a hug or sex and the intimacy of unspeakable bodily violence, which is not a unique theme. It's something that a lot of horror, and especially body horror media, has played with throughout the years, but I feel like this series does it in a unique way, and a way that I find more appealing than the way a lot of other media that toys with this does it. Just because of the culture and the magic system that's established in this setting, I can really buy that for these characters, these are moments of great intimacy and emotional weight, and not just moments of horrific violence. In the same way, I feel like Harrow and Ortis the First have been kind of brought together by their mutual horrifically violent attempts at assassination. I feel like both of them have like this weirdly intimate bond at the end of this section that I don't think they would have if they hadn't basically fully explored each other's insides, but not in a sexy way. And that brings us, and that sort of neatly segues us to the end of this section, which is the final encounter between Harrow and Ortis, where she goes out hunting for him to try and kill him, but instead ends up maybe saving his life? I'm still not sure if he's alive. I think he might be alive. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that she saves his life. If not, she certainly attempts to. And she is rewarded, but with him, A, giving her the secret to protecting herself from himself and other lictors, and B, having this weird, ominous speech where he seems to think that Harrow is someone else. Maybe Anastasia, because, you know, ninth house, maybe. Anyway, he thinks that she's someone else, and he starts to say that he wants to know why she brought along the book, and then he cuts off. And we never find out the end of that sentence. And my first thought was, baby? Because Gideon, the ninth, was found as a baby and was named after this man. Which made me think that he might have something to do with that, and that maybe she's his daughter or something? Maybe? I'm not sure. The other option that I thought about was why you brought along the bastard. Not as in child born out of wedlock, but as in like an insult. Um, which I don't know what that could who that could be referring to either. There's just a lot of options. It's not a very it's not a lot to go on. Just the letters B A. Um, so, oops. So I'm definitely going to have to come back to this scene after I finish the book and try to figure out what he was talking about. The final thing I want to talk about in this section is the flashbacks. So I am now increasingly confused by the flashbacks. Specifically, I'm confused by the massive differences between the events that Harrow remembers from the first book and the events that actually happen in the first book. The obvious difference, which is that Gideon has been replaced by Ortis, makes sense. Stuff like Silas killing Coronabeth and then jumping to his death off the tower, that makes less sense. I'm not sure why Harrow's brain would produce that as what happened if the only point of these flashbacks is to... if the only point of this fake history is to essentially cover up Gideon's existence to Harrow's brain. So I'm thinking that there might be something more going on with these flashbacks. I'm thinking that maybe these flashbacks are not just false memories that are there to illustrate to us, the readers, that Harrow no longer remembers Gideon. I'm thinking that these flashbacks are maybe something, possibly the body, or maybe Gideon's soul, trying to communicate some meaningful information to Harrow. In particular, I note that so we have Silas Octacisseron killing Coronabeth Tridentarius, and let me just check here in the Dramatis Personae. Yeah, Mercymorn is from the 8th house, because Christabel's last name is Oct. So Mercymorn is of the 8th house. And Ianthe is a Tridentarius. So is this maybe trying to suggest that Mercymorn is some kind of threat to Ianthe? The 8th house killing the 3rd? Maybe? I'm also noticing that the other major characters in the flashback are the 5th house couple, and Augustine is from the 5th house. So specifically, like, the major events that are happening in the flashbacks have to do with the houses whose the houses whose lictors are still alive. And of course, the first to die in the flashback was the necromancer of the 2nd house, and her cavalier is still very much an active presence in the story. And Ortis, quote unquote Ortis, was from the 2nd house. Whereas, for example, the 4th house, who is not represented by a currently living or currently relevant lictor, is conspicuously absent from these flashbacks. Yeah, as is the 6th house. Like, the 6th house gets killed off very early, and I'm wondering if that has something to do with the fact that the 6th house lictor is also long dead and doesn't really matter to the story anymore. I don't know. I don't know if I'm onto something or if I'm grasping at straws here, but it feels noteworthy to me that the characters in the flashback are specifically the ones associated with the houses of the characters who are currently alive in this book. Yeah. The other question about the flashbacks, of course, well, there's two questions. One is the sleeper. The sleeper seems to be implied to be Gideon because the sleeper has like a huge two-handed sword. So if anything in the flashbacks is like explicitly a case of Gideon's mind trying to break through to Harrow, it's the sleeper. But I haven't seen enough of the sleeper yet to really make a firm prediction about that. But the other thing I'm curious about is the notes. So Harrow keeps, whenever she looks at really any written piece of paper, she sees these like deranged ramblings that sound like a serial killer is writing them. They're like accusing someone of like really weird and vague crimes, and promising retribution for that. So I guess my question about this is, within the narrative of the false history, Harrow claims that she has always been insane and that she sees things that aren't there, and she has this whole established thing with Ortis where she'll show him things that she reads and have him read them for her so that she knows what's really on the paper, etc., etc., etc. I guess my question is this. Is the real Harrow, is this something that happened to the real Harrow? Like, during Gideon the Ninth, was Harrow constantly seeing things that weren't there? Or is this only an aspect of Harrow's character in the false history? Perhaps an aspect of her character caused by Gideon trying to break through the false memories. If that makes sense. Like before she absorbed Gideon's soul, did Harrow ever see things that weren't there? Because I don't remember that being a thing in the first book. I don't remember Harrow having like hallucinations. Maybe hallucinations of the body. I can see that happening, but because I don't think those are hallucinations. I think those are like I still think the body that she keeps seeing is actually there. Not physically there, but spiritually there. I think she's seeing something that's actually present when the body shows up. At least that's kind of the vibe I'm getting so far. But the notes are definitely in her head. And I do think that if this is a real thing, like if Harrow really has been seeing things that aren't there, and it's not just a false memory of her seeing things that aren't there in the false history, but if she really does see things that aren't there, then I imagine it has something to do with the body as well. But if it's just something in her memories, like a false memory, then I'm inclined to say it's tied to Gideon again. But if it's tied to Gideon, then the actual content of the notes doesn't make any sense, because the content of the notes, like my reading of those notes, is that maybe it's actually the body writing those, because it's like someone swearing vengeance or whatever, and that doesn't sound like Gideon. Like, the notes read like maybe the person in the locked tomb ranting at John or something like that is what I would guess those notes are. I don't know. The flashback chapters are definitely the weirdest element of this book. Not in a bad way. I enjoy them a great deal, but they are definitely like the thing where I have the most questions, and it's the most unclear to me which parts of the flashbacks are in any way reflective of reality and which parts are entirely in Harrow's head. Which leads us to the interesting question of like, so within the narrative of the flashbacks, the weird writing is in Harrow's head, but is the fact that she has writing that is in her head itself something that is in her head? This plot makes me tie my brain in knots sometimes. I'm gonna go read Act 4. Those were my extremely incoherent thoughts about Harrow the Ninth, Act 3. See you next week, guys. Bye.